Hi guys, and welcome to the 8th and final installment of Steve Ward's Mastering Trading Psychology series. All these webinars will be available in the archives, so it's well worth going back over time and having a closer look at some of the practices that are involved. So I hope you enjoyed all of them, and I will hand it over to Steve now. Cheers, Steve.
Thank you, Nick. And yeah, welcome. And it is the 8th and final session of the Mastering Trading Psychology program. And today in session 8, we're going to have a look really at, I guess, an overall theme of enhancing performance, really trying to look at how we can build a few of the ideas and techniques we've learned along the way into your practice, talk a bit about behavior change, essentially. Performance enhancement is behavior change. It's about doing things differently, practicing different ways of doing, and that's not always easy. We know that change can be challenging, so we'll have a look at a few hacks as to how we can maybe work around a bit of that, and also try and, I think, get a bit of momentum going. Although it's the end of the program formally today, obviously what I want you guys to be doing is keep working on your skills, keep practicing, keep learning, keep developing. Ongoing. I can say from the best traders I work with who've been trading 15, 20, 25 years, they're always looking to improve performance. It's an ongoing journey. So here's the main agenda for today's session. We'll start by looking at a bit of the theme around, I guess, know thyself, just really beginning to take a bit of stock as to where you're at with your trading, your strengths and your limitations. We'll do a little practice together. Something's called scaling, so we can look at how we can take your trading to the next level. Of course, we need to know what the next level is, and then we'll look really at two key themes around how you can improve your performance. Firstly, around building on strengths and successes, and then on working on or working around your weaknesses or limitations. And then we'll finish off with a quick look into really just keeping going. I think this is one of the key things. I remember when I was doing martial arts as a youngster, and asking sensei, the teacher, what does it take to become a black belt? And the first thing he said to me was, you just got to keep coming. The guys who make black belt are the guys who keep coming each week to practice. So there's a lot to be said for purely keeping going. I'm not saying that's the only thing, but it's definitely a factor. So an interesting question really is, who are you? Who am I? Who are we? It's how have we become who we've become? And when we look to answer that question, we can look at three key determinants. One is our genetics, and this is everything that we've I guess been given prior before we come out of the womb. Once we're out of the womb, that's it. Genetics really have played their part. And then it comes down to environment, the places we're in, and experience, what we're doing in those places. So, a family environment, school environments, college, university, sports teams, dance classes, friendship groups, and what we're doing in those environments. All of that is continually shaping and wiring the brain and making us who we are. And so who we are at this moment in time as people and as traders is a reflection of those three things. Then what it means, obviously, is going forwards. Who we become going forwards is predominantly going to be around the environments we're in and the experiences we have. And this is where, as I've tried to stress through the workshops, doing the practices is so important. The practices, the doing is the experiences. It's one of the key ways that we can shape the brain, create new neural pathways, what's called neuroplasticity, and develop you, make you a newer you. Going back to that Mark Douglas quote about the future trading you that Mark Douglas refers to. So that's what we're doing. So what we are trying to do during this program, and obviously what anybody who's doing training and coaching are doing, is trying to provide environments and experiences that enable you to become a better you. That's what we're looking for. It's good at this stage, and we won't do this in great depth right now, but something for you guys to do following the webinar is, and we've touched on this practice before, the fearless personal inventory. I think I first heard that phrase in one of Brett Steenbarger's books, but the fearless personal inventory. essentially, a brutally honest and objective review of you and your trading. I think, now is a really good time to step back and do this process. One, because it fits in beautifully with the theme we're covering in this particular webinar, but also over the last 7 sessions, we've covered an awful lot of material related to the psychology of trading and the performance side of trading, and combining that with the other work you're doing on your technical and your tactical skills. It's important every now and again to kind of press pause, step back, review, evaluate, and then set some actions for going forward. So have a look at your results and be brutally honest about the results you've been getting from your trading. Sometimes we can be happy with our results, sometimes we're not so happy, but whatever they are, they're the results, and they're telling you, they're giving you information about your trading. Have a look at your trading process, your planning, your preparation, your execution, your evaluation. Dig into your trade process, how you generate trading ideas, how you manage your risk, how you identify trading opportunities, how you manage your trades, the entries, the exits. Really take time to look at everything you're doing with as great a clarity and intensity as you can. A bit like an audit, I guess. Have a look at, as this data evolves, where you're strong, what you do well. Have a look at the areas where maybe you're not as strong, where you've got limitations or weaknesses. And out of all of that, what we're looking for, what's critical, is the key areas for development, the things that you can do differently, things you go away and practice, do more of, maybe some things to do less of. But this is where the behavior change and the performance enhancement comes from. So we need to be doing that process. So I really encourage you to kind of take some time to really do that, an in-depth inventory, an audit of your trading. Something else we can think about, or something that I use with my clients at this stage, is when we're looking at knowing yourself, we can also look at people's personality, and obviously there's a wide range of personality tests out there that people can take. The one that I tend to use is something called the Risk Compass Assessment. I tend to use this one. One, it's very quick and simple and easy to take and to use, and that's important for my typical clients. It also gives us very useful information that's specific to the trading environment, not in terms of the output from the actual test, but in terms of the themes that are covered around risk-taking, decision-making, and resiliency, how we deal with the outcomes of our risk decisions. So the Risk Compass is interesting because I think we need to understand as people who we are, so that we can find ways of trading that are the best expression of ourselves. So a phrase you may begin to hear more of is something called gene expression. Gene expression really is saying that we've got genes that are kind of almost dormant within us until we do a behavior, and then those genes are expressed rather than the genes are there and kind of drive our behavior inside out. So we've all probably got some dispositions towards certain types of risk. And the Risk Compass, as you can see, basically 8 different risk types, 9 if we include the typical part in the middle. This is how it's constructed to make it a bit more simplistic. It's going vertically, we've got at the top a risk aversion bias, and going down the vertical axis we get more towards a risk seeking bias. And then left to right we've got an intuitive, subjective to analytical, objective type bias. So if we're in the top left quadrant, essentially lower risk tolerance, more intuitive, versus if you were in the bottom right, more risk seeking and slightly more analytical, and so on. So 4 key quadrants. Now each of those 4 quadrants, it's not black and white from quadrant to quadrant, but there's certainly going to be different trading tendencies and styles. People definitely in the risk aversion and analytical quadrant, the top right hand quadrant, we see a lot of quants, a lot of longer term traders, a lot of technical guys appearing on that side. We certainly see in terms of the right hand side of the Risk Compass to the left hand side that the shorter term trading guys, particularly those holding well under 2 weeks, much more towards the left hand side. The guys, let's call them the price action traders, the guys who love the 1 minute and the 2 minute candles, we see them predominantly around that bottom left hand side, bottom left quadrant. So it doesn't mean that we can predict what somebody will be like as a trader, but we can certainly, or from the research I've got, I can certainly say that there are key themes and ideas that would enable somebody to maybe be a better fit towards their trading style. So we're looking really, a bit like I guess in sport, is somebody going to be a long distance runner or a sprinter? Are they going to be a team player or an individual sports person? Where might our best strengths lie? And that's really what the risk compass and other psychometric tools as well, whichever ones are available, like Myers-Briggs has been used with traders, the Neo-PI has been used as well. So, but they can be useful tools to give you a sense of that deeper rooted personality and where your kind of key trading strengths may lie. And also important in the risk compass is there's not one risk type which is the best one. I've got traders spread pretty much around the trading, around the compass, and certainly one of my best traders is in the intense top left-hand quadrant, a phenomenal trader, and takes very, very big risks. So it's not that people are risk averse in terms of don't take risk, it's how they manage the risk, which is really important. But again, I don't want to get too deep into that. I'm just really kind of saying that, for yourselves, it can be useful. It's another form of information, is that we can get, our personality, what kind of person are we? And you might know that intuitively. Every now and again, it can be useful with a tool or a test to give us more information. But certainly if you were in that bottom left-hand quadrant and you were trying to trade very long time frame, in a very analytical way, you might find that challenging. And it's really a blend between finding what you're good at, what you're best at, your niche or your sweet spot, but also recognizing in trading that we do need to be flexible. Probably now more so than ever, markets are more challenging, chopping and changing around. We need to maybe have a few different markets, a few different styles to be flexible with. So it's getting that blend. Let's have a look at taking your trading to the next level. That's really the main theme of this particular webinar. The goal from the beginning really was to try and help you to become your best trading self. That's what I've tried to do in putting this program together. We have to recognize the limitations of an 8-webinar program. This is a huge topic. We've picked out a few key themes. Hopefully it's given you a bit of direction, some focus. But let's start to think about the next level. So if we talk about taking performance to the next level, the most important thing that we need to start with is actually, well, what is the next level? This is key. What is the next level? How would you know when you got there? So I want to take you through relatively quickly a 5-step process called scaling. Comes from solution-focused psychology. It's a great technique. I love doing this technique with clients, and you can do this for yourself. You can do it as a part of your review process, maybe quarterly or annually, whatever's right for you. First thing I want you to do is I want you to think about and imagine you at your best as a trader at some point in the future, in the medium to long-term future. Imagine a really successful trader, you trading well, being the sort of trader you would like to be. And just take a moment to really think about exactly what that means for you. Just getting a sense of what your best trading self might look like, how you might be behaving, how you're thinking, how you're feeling. Maybe even the markets you might be trading and how you might be trading them. And with a sense of that, I want you to just give that a 10. So we're just going to score that as a 10. And I want you now to just think about, in relation to the 10, where you are now. So on a 1 to 10 scale, where 10 is you at your best, an imagined future best, as best as you can with what you know right now. Where would you place yourself now on that 1 to 10 scale? Now, a lot of people here, and we just call that number X to keep it generic for now. A lot of people's temptation now is, how do I get from X to 10? But actually, there's a really important step that I want you guys to think about now, which is, how do you get to X? So even if you're only a 2 or a 3 or a 4, you've already made progress towards that 10. And I want you just to take a moment to think about, what have you done already? What skills have you got? What knowledge have you gained? What's working with your strategies? What's good about the way that you're thinking, you're feeling, habits you've developed? Just think about all the things you've done in the time you've been trading so far that have got you to this point today, to X. And now what I'd like to invite you to do is to think about what the next step would be like. Not to 10. So if you're at a 5 now, what would a 6 be like? Let's just go 1 point higher. What would x plus 1 be like? If you were slightly better than you are now, what would be different? What would you notice? Just kind of really get a good sense of what it's like to be at x plus 1. And that's the target now. That's the target we're aiming for, is x plus 1. And then we get into, and what do we need to do to get there? What are the steps we can take? And when you're climbing the performance spiral, essentially we've got two main lines of attack. Firstly, which is the one that most people tend to go for, we can work on or we can work around our weaknesses. The less intuitive one is actually we can also build on our strengths and successes, which is very important. It's a bit counterintuitive because we have negativity bias. So we tend to be much more focused on our weaknesses, on our losses, on our mistakes, than we do on our strengths and successes. But we do want to do both. It's not about doing one or the other, but it's about recognizing we have a bias towards just the weaknesses. And actually in doing that and missing out on our strengths, we can be missing out on quite a lot of our performance. So not just working on what's wrong, but also working on where we're strong. Yeah, that's a phrase. I can't remember where I heard that phrase, but I liked it when I heard it. So not working not just on what's wrong, but also what's strong. And actually, working around your weaknesses can get you probably from good to very good. I think to get from the good and the very good to the great, I think you've got to be able to identify those strengths and be able to leverage them. I think that's a real key part of excellence for sure. So we're going to have a look at these two themes really. We'll start off with looking at building on strengths. We'll go for the counterintuitive first. And this is a great quote from Brett Steenbarger. Your trading business is most likely to succeed if you play to your strengths and you work around your weaknesses. Okay. And it's this idea around being solution focused. It comes from an area of psychology called brief psychology, because the interventions are brief in terms of their time, but highly effective. So we need to do three things in working in this solution focused way. First of all, the ultimate goal is to begin to discover more about who you are at your best. So we need to make sure that in our evaluations, we are learning from success, not just focusing on our losing trades and our mistakes and our losing periods, but also bringing focus to the winning trades, to the good trading periods, and when things are going well. And again, we'll have to work hard at that because it's not the way the brain naturally works. So this is a performance habit you've got to build. We want to be able to focus on those strengths and work on them. Once you identify some strengths you've got, the aim is to kind of bring them into the core of your trading and essentially do more of what works. Yeah? This is I guess the underlying philosophy is doing more of what works. And actually sometimes I see a trader who's got a trading behavior they're trying to fix, and even there, let's say somebody's having challenges with running their profits. That there'll often be an exception to those times. So they won't be not running their profits all of the time. So I'll try and get them to find out, tell me some times when actually you are running your profits. Okay, let's have a look at that. And even within that, let's try and do more of what's working in those situations than trying to unwind and undo what isn't working on the few times when you're getting frustrated about not running your profits far enough. So, even within our general behavior, we can start to look at this solution-focused approach. For every behavior we've got we think we're not doing well, we're probably doing it okay to well at some times. Our behavior, very contextual. So the two key questions to think about are really, what are my strengths? That's the first one. And how can I leverage them? So if you imagine, this is a good exercise to do, draw like a mountain range of maybe 6 to 10 peaks. And each of those peaks of the mountain range represents either a good trade you've made, a really good trade you've made, or a good trading period. or it can even be done areas from life if you want to go a bit broader, peak areas from life, but peak experiences for these peaks. And then if you drill down into those experiences and what was happening and what you were thinking, what you were feeling, and all the factors that contributed to make it a peak experience, and then you look across the 6 to 10, you might well find that certain themes start to come through. I've just did this practice very recently with a trader. Very, very useful for him to identify what his strengths were when he was doing things well, the factors that tended to be in place. But we do need to start to know that. This is a key thing. I think most people could give a very good list of their weaknesses. We might find it harder to do our strengths. But we do need to be actively looking for them. And then this is our mantra to a degree: do more of what works. So we've got to do more of what works. You've got to actually, again, you've got to focus on what is working. This is really key. So you can do more of it. And some ways that you can do that, at the end of the day, think about what's gone well today. How can I do more of that tomorrow? What's gone well this week? How can I do more of that next week? What's gone well this month? How can I do more of that next month? So it's getting this habit of noticing what's gone well and then building on that. Consciously choosing to do more of it the next week. It's really, really good progress. Great for getting some momentum. Okay? And even for beginner and newer traders, this can be a very valuable process. Beginning to identify more of what works. Of course, there will be times, and we can do the same thing for a trade. Yeah? So what was good about that particular trade? How can I do more of that? But of course, there will be, for all of us, for definite, there'll be things that we're not so strong at, things we're not doing well. And if any of those are critical, then actually we should probably address those first. For example, if you were a trader whose risk management was poor, let's say never taking your stops, losing large amounts of money, that is a far more important focus area than building on a strength. Okay, so from time to time, either building on a strength or working around a weakness is going to be the most effective strategy. It's going to be a judgment call, but we're looking at, for the working on and around weaknesses, we're looking for that damage limitation. If something's really hurting us, causing lots of pain, then we need to deal with that first. But just take a moment for yourself. Think about, maybe what some of your limitations are. What are the challenges you face? What would your weaknesses be as a trader? And again, something I'd encourage you to do beyond today, give this some real thought. And one way you can kind of begin to, I guess, get this down on paper is what I call opposite action plans. So we start off with, think about specific situations where maybe you've got an area of weakness. It might be, again, it could be not holding winners far enough. It could be maybe not taking your stops. It might be that maybe you're chasing losses after a losing trade, or the opposite, you're not getting into the market after a losing trade. It could be you're trading too often or not enough or too big or too small. There could be a whole number. But think about a situation is the first step where you've got some kind of area of weakness or limitation. And then think about, okay, well, what are you doing at the moment? So what's the current behavior and what results is it getting for you? Results here in terms of emotions, in terms of behavior, as well as in terms of financial results. So we've got our situation and what we're currently doing. Now, if you're going to change your behavior, you need to decide in advance what you're going to do instead. And if I'm going to stop eating cake, what am I going to do instead? If I go into a cafe, that's my situation. My old approach might be, I choose a bit of cake and eat it. The results are, a quick sugar high followed by a sugar low. And maybe I moan and groan that I'm eating sugary food, and in the long term, I gain weight. What do I want to do different instead? I need to think about my new approach and expected difference. Okay, I say no to the cake. I choose an apple. I eat the apple. Maybe in the short term, it's not quite as enjoyable as a cake, but actually it's okay. Still feels pretty tasty. In the long term, though, I lose my weight. I feel healthier. But the key thing is, now that I've got in my mind this new approach and expected difference, when it comes to making the choice, it's going to be much, much easier. If I haven't got an alternative behavior, I can only go with the old behavior. So you need to start thinking about, if I'm not going to do X, what am I going to do instead? If I'm not getting out of my trades early, what am I doing? If I'm not getting angry and frustrated and chasing my losses, what am I doing instead? And what's the difference going to be? So it's just a nice way to begin to think about, I want to shift from here, and here's where I want to shift to. And actually, I find often once you just begin to identify the behavior you want to be doing instead, then actually it's not so much about not doing the old behavior, it's more about just practicing the new behavior. And that's quite a nice mental shift to make. I'm not giving up cake. I'm just starting to eat apples more often. I'm not, it's not about me not revenge trading. I'm just being much more patient and selective in my trading. So we're shifting away from an aversive behavior change process to much more one of approaching. It's far more positive, far more engaging. But we do need to know what it is we're going to do instead. That's the key point I want to make. But even when we know that, it's not quite as easy as we might think. So we know that change is challenging. So just a few stats here, just for a bit of fun really, but 95% of people who lose weight on a diet regain it, and a large number put on more weight. After a heart attack, only 1 in 7 people makes any enduring changes around eating or exercise. This is even people who are told change or die. There's a great book called Change or Die. Alan Deutschman, he talks about how, again, with heart attack patients, people, literally, if you don't change your diet and you don't exercise more, you're going to die. Okay, doctor. And literally they go away 2, 3, 4, 5 days later, sometimes even less, they're back in the old habits. Even though they know it could increase their, or not could, it is going to increase their chances of death. And that's a pretty big motivator. 25% of the people abandon New Year's resolutions after 1 week. I love this one though. The average person makes the same resolution 10 separate times without success. And at a bigger level, for those of you interested in the corporate world, 70% of organizational change initiatives ultimately fail. So if we see those stats, we go, well, are we ever going to make this change? Yes, we can. We just got to be smart about it. We've got to understand the change process. We've got to approach it in the right way. This is classic of a lot of people here, where we're coming down to kind of blatant either willpower. I'm relying on willpower to do this alone. It's not going to be enough. So just for a moment, it'd be good for you guys actually, because with the way that we make change, I mean, I can give you some kind of, I guess, standard practices, and some hacks and some tips and techniques, but you might already have done some of this for yourself already. So think about a time, it can be in trading or in life, but think about a time when you adopted a new behavior. So, a time when you made a successful behavior change. Maybe you started doing something, going to the gym more often, or maybe you gave up something, gave up smoking, whatever it might be. But just think about, with that behavior change, what for you helped you to make the change? And then I want you to contrast that with a time when you tried to make a change, but you were unsuccessful. And maybe just by thinking about those two, some things might come to mind already that will give you clues as to how to be more successful in behavior change, in terms of the things that help you and the things that stop you. I'm going to share some ideas from my side of things, but certainly you might find that you've got some unique things as well. So we'll, the person who knows, find that you've got some unique things as well. So we'll, the person who knows you best is you. So always look for insights from within. There's a lot. I was actually coaching a guy just earlier on today, trader, and we just finished our round of 6 coaching sessions. And one of the things he's found really helpful, I guess, is being able to, through questioning through me, is find out more about himself and why he does what he does and how he does what he does. But it's coming from within. There's lots of clues as to our own successes and failures from within, as well as from textbooks and research and everything else. So let's have a quick look. 7 things I think are important to understand about behavior change, about making changes. The first one, which we touched on earlier, is performance improvement, is behavior changes, doing things differently. So if we want to improve trading performance, it is about behavior change. So this stuff is really, really relevant. We know that change can be difficult, generally because we like familiarity, we get comfortable, and then when we try and make a change, suddenly we're putting ourselves into that uncertain environment, creates a bit of stress in our system, and ultimately the brain is working to keep us as we are, the status quo bias. People do change, and I see this a lot in coaching, and it's very interesting when you're seeing it. But people change when they're ready, and there are stages of change in terms of kind of thinking about change, and then sort of contemplating change, and being ready to make the change, and then actually making the change. And we can't just assume that for all of us we have the idea, okay, I need to change this, and the next day I change it. It doesn't quite work that way. There's a process people go through. And it's the old, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. That's a classic for me as a coach, in terms of people are not always ready for coaching. They're not always ready for change, and when they are ready, then it's great. But we can't make people do things when they're not ready. So we have to understand that sometimes you might want to change, you might not always be ready for change. It's also interesting that when we look at the driver of change, emotion can be very powerful. How are we going to feel once we've made the change? Tying in the change to the feelings, very, very powerful. Also important to recognize that for most of us, most of the time, change is much more evolutionary than revolutionary. It's a shaping process. It requires a lot of time and effort to make a change. It's not often a flick of a switch. That can be a factor in itself. Along the journey of change, and again, I was having a discussion with somebody last week around this, relapse is common. It's a bit like momentum in the market. We get some upward movement in the market, then we might get a pullback, then we might get an upward movement, we might get some consolidation. So we've got an overall uptrend, but we're getting some pullbacks and some consolidation along the way. Just the same as we get with change, relapse. Sometimes we're doing a new behavior, things are going great. Every now and again, we might go back to the old way. This is a danger zone because people typically interpret it as failure and then give up. It's not. So relapse, restart, we reset, and then we go again. And then finally, this is a key finding from Alan Deutschman's book, is the importance of relationships. That having a coach, or having a group of people, or a friend or a partner, a trading buddy, can be really powerful in supporting people through the change process. So now, I think those things are important to be aware of, and then we'll kind of wrap these up into a few hacks later as well, so we can look at how to apply these. But I think it's just important to understand a little bit about the psychology, so that we can preempt some of the challenges. We can go into it with the right mindset. We can be open and aware to things like the relapse and the time it might take and the effort it might take to enable us to get through it in a more effective way. But of course, we will ultimately, we do need some willpower in change. We don't want to utilize any more than we have to, because willpower is limited. A guy called Roy Baumeister has written a great book actually called Willpower. It's definitely worth reading. Some great experiments that he's conducted. And I guess the two key things really that Baumeister has really come through around willpower is, one, that it's a limited resource, such that as we're using up our willpower, we're also depleting our willpower, like a glass of water. And once it is gone, it's kind of gone. So until it's replenished. So if you're working on changing some behaviors, in doing so, you kind of the willpower required is draining the willpower juice as such. As it gets lower, it's harder to maintain willpower. But that willpower pot's also coming from the frontal lobe, the same as our decision making and our planning and our strategizing and our cognitive function. So the more of our cognitive function we're using, we're also drawing on that same kind of pool. And as our body energy goes down, that's also important. So as we become fatigued and we become tired, it's hard to make change, because again, it's all drawing from the same kind of pool of energy. But when we exert some willpower and then we get some recovery, some good sleep or recovery during the day, much like a muscle, once it's been stressed, we get a strengthening effect. So using our willpower is good. We need to get the balance of recovery, a theme again we've touched on in the past, but very important. But we don't want to, if we can, we don't want to make all of our change just down to pure willpower. So one of the things we want to try and do is we've got to be smart. We've got to look at the brain and how the brain responds to change, and then we've got to find some ways to work around it to make the chances of change more successful. Now, one of those is to try and make whatever your new habit or behavior is, to try and automate it. You know, a lot of our behavior is automatic, habitual. So we want to try and build it into something maybe repeatable that we can do at a certain time. We can't always do this, but where we can, it makes it much easier. We definitely want to keep changes small. If we're changing one thing in it, if we're changing big things, we definitely want a very small number. If they're slightly smaller things, we might be able to do a few more, but probably one or two at a time with everything else we're going on around us is going to be enough. And again, this is about the preservation of our willpower reserves. If we try and change 10 things, we're spreading our willpower over 10 things. And if we're also doing maybe some changes at work or in life elsewhere, then very quickly that willpower pot becomes exhausted. So we want to keep the change small, chunk it down, one or two things at a time. Build them slowly. We're looking for small successes as we start to make the change. We want to start noticing and looking for signs of progress. We want to be very precise and specific about what we're changing as well, not just getting better at something. It's not enough. We need to try and quantify or be very precise about, the behavior we're changing and have a real intention to change something. We need to, again, focus on something that we want to do rather than something we're resisting. This is, again, going back to our opposite action plan. It's a bit like that, but also I think, I remember working with a guy who was continually overtrading, and he was trying not to overtrade. And actually, what he was really trying to do, when I asked him, was the solution was not to not overtrade, but was to be more patient and more selective. And that is now something that he can now focus on doing rather. So don't resist overtrading. Just focus on being patient and being selective. The end outcome in terms of trade volume is the same thing. The process of doing it is very different psychologically. We need to expect some resistance, which we've talked about. Relapse, immunity to change. It's hard for the system sometimes to change. So again, plan for relapse. Work out in advance. Okay, here's the behavior I'm going to change. But if one day, for whatever reason, I don't follow through with that, here's how I'll deal with it. And then again, finally, get support. Support is really powerful. Multiple studies from sport, from business, from life in general, where people are supported through some sort of change process, they tend to be far more effective. I think that's behind the rise of the personal trainer, the rise of coaching, psychologists, psychiatrists. All these people are really supporters. They're helping the person to shape their behavior over time. Now, it's interesting when we look at the neuroscience of change, we look in the brain. What we're trying to do when we make a change with all these processes and stuff is actually we're trying to make new pathways in the brain, neural pathways. Think about a field of wheat, and you walk through the field of wheat, and the first time you can't really tell that you've been through it. But if you walk through it multiple times, then you will get to a stage where you'll see that very clear path going through. And that's essentially what we're trying to do in the brain, is create these clear pathways. And that's when it becomes habitual, when it becomes automatic, is when you've got a clear pathway. But building new pathways takes time and it takes effort. It's not a one-hit process. It can be achieved through physical practice. So when you do a new behavior, you ignite, you're firing the new pathway in the brain. And interestingly, if you imagine doing the behavior, if you visualize it, then you also fire that same pathway in the brain. But what you need for behavior change, the end outcome we're looking for, is the new neural pathway. Without the neural pathway to support the new feeling or thinking or behavior, then you simply can't do it. So the end goal is the creation of these neural pathways. The change process is really just a roadmap towards creating the pathway. But it is interesting that we can do it in two ways. So if we look at this concept, neurobehavioral modeling, what it simply means is that to generate a new behavior, we need to model the behavior, and we need to do it at a neurological level. We need to make changes in the brain, and it can be done essentially through simulation, live, and internal mental rehearsal. So let's say we've got a trader who is having challenges with getting into the market after a losing trade. Let's say they get overwhelmed with fear and anxiety, and they find it hard to get into the trade. So we want that trader to be able to get back into the market more effectively following a losing trade. Now, at a behavioral level, the two ways that we can ingrain that are physically getting them into the market after a losing trade again, so that the physical practice, but we could also help that trader to use mental rehearsal, to imagine themselves maybe coming out of a losing trade, imagine how they're thinking and feeling, and then to see themselves, getting into the next good trading opportunity. Not diving in straight away, that's not the right thing. We want to be specific about what we're visualizing, getting into the market at the next good trading opportunity. And actually through rehearsal, mental rehearsal, we're building those neural pathways, strengthening the brain, making it easier to do in reality. Because we may not have that many chances to practice in reality, and it takes multiple repetitions before we can create the new neural pathway strong enough to make it automatic. So the visualization becomes an accelerator, and that's why visualization, mental rehearsal, imagery, call it what we will, is used in lots of different performance environments very successfully. It's one of probably the most researched forms of mental training that we have in performance psychology. It's used in the military, in special forces training. It's used by pilots. It's used in sport. It's used by musicians. It's used by performing artists, people giving presentations. In fact, I was actually working with a trading group on Tuesday last week. We were doing a presentation, and we were talking about how traders prepare. And we're getting some ideas from the group. And one of the guys actually, and interestingly actually, because I didn't find this out until later, but he was one of the group's most successful traders and has been successful over a large number of years. And his contribution was the importance of mental rehearsal, which for him was looking at scenarios that might occur during the trading day and then mentally rehearsing them, playing them through in his mind before they actually happened, and rehearsing what he would do if they did happen. Okay. And again, what's happening there is, in that rehearsal process, is he's kind of pre-wiring the brain for those possibilities, such if they do happen, he'll be able to deal with them much more effectively. I find mental rehearsal in trading powerful for behavior change if we can specifically identify a particular behavior that needs changing. You can use it for imagining yourself trading well in general, for sure. I think it's a bit more challenging for most people to do that. I think if you've got a particular behavior, holding a trade longer, getting out of losing trades quicker, maybe adjustments to trading size, trying out new strategies, getting into markets, on new entries and so on. I think where the behavior is specific and you can kind of be quite clear about it, then mental rehearsal gives you a great tool for practicing, for developing that neural pathway to accelerate your learning curve. So I thought what we would do is we'll have a look at the mental rehearsal process, and I'll take you through it. And maybe as we're going through this, if you get yourself into a seated, comfortable position, you might like to think for yourself about a behavior that you would like to change or do more effectively or do more consistently, and we could do it in real time. So the goal always, the first part of visualization or mental rehearsal, is we're going into the practice knowing what it is we're going to practice. So something you'd like to be doing differently. So we're going to rehearse the new behavior or a behavior you like to be more effective at, do better, do more consistently, whatever it might be. Then we want a comfortable, relaxed position for posture. Most of you will find visualization much easier with eyes closed, so maybe just taking a moment to allow your eyes to close, just looking outside the outside world and allowing your mind to go inside. And just for the next moment or two, just focus on taking a few relaxed breaths. Just breathing from the belly. As you breathe in, expanding the belly. As you breathe out, relaxing the belly. Just allowing yourself to become more and more relaxed with each out breath. And now I'd like you to just picture yourself now, and it might be that you see it on a screen, or it might be you see it from your own eyes, whichever's right for you. But just take some time now to imagine yourself doing that new behavior. See yourself at your trading screens, at your desk, doing that new behavior or improving that behavior, whichever's right for you. But just imagine yourself there practicing, doing things the way you'd like to do things like that now. And if it's quite quick, just rehearsing it a few times in your mind, going through the scenario, seeing kind of the leading up. It's very important, although we use words like visualization and imagery, very important as you're going through this process to see what you can see, but also to hear all the sounds that you can hear and to feel all the feelings that might be there. And just play with a couple more times in your mind, just really seeing yourself doing that new behavior really well. And it's okay to kind of, notice any feelings of anxiety or stress that might be there in reality. Whatever the feelings that are there in reality, allow them to be there, but really focus on the behavior. See yourself doing the behavior you want. We want it to be as realistic as is possible. It's like a mental simulation. And then just bringing this short visualization practice to an end, bringing attention back to the room, opening your eyes, just give yourself a moment to reorientate. Okay. So in very simple terms, visualization is about seeing yourself do specific trading behaviors in the way you would like to. Make it realistic. If after a losing trade you get some anxiety before you get back into the trade, imagine yourself with a bit of that anxiety, but see yourself taking the trade anyway. Okay, it's the behavior we really want to program in. The anxiety might just be a natural part of that experience. And this is where it can really start to pay dividends, because if we look at behavior change and how long it takes, the typical number I get is 21 to 28 days. That's the one that was kind of written in all the self-help books many years ago. In fact, it's even written in some newer ones. But there's not much solid research has been done, apart from these guys did do some here in 2009, and they found the plateau of behavior change occurred typically at about 66 days. It does depend on how complex and demanding the task is, so there is definitely variance. That's important. So we can see, drinking a glass of water each day probably peaks at around, around about the 20-day mark actually. 50 sit-ups a day, much longer, around about probably the 100 days. I would say, from my own experience, you're looking for most people, around about 3 months. 60 to 90 days is about right, but that does depend on daily practice. If you've got a trading behavior that only is a problem once a week, then over 3 months you're going to get 12 practices. So it's not so much the number of days, it's how much practice you can get, you know. So if it's a daily habit, then 66 days is 66 practices. But if you were doing mental rehearsal, visualization alongside that, then potentially we could speed up that learning process. And that's where the visualization becomes really powerful. A key part of trading, and I think I put a chapter on this in high performance trading, is keeping going, perseverance. You know, one of the key things I hear from newer traders, maybe they've come into, you know, a trading group or into a bank, they've done a bit of work, and maybe I meet them for the second time. You know, how are things going? And that'll be a common phrase I'll hear: it's harder than I thought, or it's taking longer than I thought. You know, so if that's you, then you're in good company. It is difficult. It does take a long time. There's a lot that needs to be worked on in terms of skills, knowledge, strategy, state, all these factors. You've got to sustain a lot of effort over a long period of time to be good at anything, whatever it might be. Now, whether it's 10,000 hours or 10 years is always up for debate a little bit, but it's certainly not going to be 10 days or even 10 months. So, you know, it's a considerable amount of time. It is years to gain mastery in anything. A guy called Alan Duckworth in Uni of Pennsylvania talks about, you know, grit, you know, resiliency, keeping going, even when things are tough. And I think you need to have a lot of grit to be successful in trading, because the markets will test you with losing trades, losing runs. Their markets will change. You've got to change and adapt. That'll be challenging. If we go from a learning perspective, you know, Candace Erickson, and we talked about earlier in the program, the single most important factor in developing a mastery and expertise in performance-based activities such as trading, deep practice. This is I've got a goal for my practice, I do the practice and I review it. Deliberate practice, really key. And so underpinning all these, you know, to keep going, to have this grit, to do this practice, you've got to be passionate. You've got to enjoy what you're doing. I think it's one of the most important factors in being successful in anything, is you've got to enjoy what you're doing, and you've got to be committed. Yeah, motivation, sort of the coming and going energy to kind of drive us to do things we need to do. It's not sufficient, because motivation will be lower as your results are lower. Motivation will lower as your energy lowers. But some days you'll have low energy and poor results, but there's still stuff you need to do. That's where your commitment is important. And that's where your passion is important, you know, really loving and enjoying what you're doing. And we started off in session 1, many weeks ago now, with a slide. This slide, looking at commitment. I'm going to kind of come back to it really as the last slide of the program, because I think it's so important. But, you know, to get good at trading, you've got to routinely engage in specific activities that increase the chances of good trading performance. And we've talked in the program about some of those, though there's many others as well. But to keep doing that, you've got to be committed. That's going to be reflected in what your values are. You know, why do you trade? What are you turning up for? When you're in front of the screens, why are you there? What are you trying to achieve? What's really important to you about your trading? What within trading is of importance, maybe at a personal level to you? The next bit, one of my favorite exercises. You know, if nothing could hold you back from being the trader you really wanted to be, what would that look like? This is our 10 from earlier. How would you like to be? How would you like to act as a trader? You know, imagine you've become that person. Now imagine you've spent 10 years like that. You know, imagine you were interviewed by a journalist, maybe it's Bloomberg or Reuters, or someone's come along, or the FT, one of those profile pieces. You know, what would that article say about you? What would be the top 3 or 4 qualities that would come through in that interview about you and the trader that you are? And this is giving you some ideas about what's deeply important for going forward. And it's the values which They're a bit like the compass. They keep you heading in the right direction. We need to know what they are. Otherwise, it's a bit of a random walk. We need a little bit of direction and some purpose. So as we move into taking action, we've got taking action really in terms of the whole program. This is really about finding, going back through the sessions, doing the reading more, learning more, and I use this model. I call it the performance funnel, to really think about how if we can have a wide left-hand edge, if we can, the more things you're doing that maximize your edge, that give you the best chance of fulfilling your potential, then the less your thoughts and your emotions and your feelings and behavior will interfere in your trading performance. They're not going to go away. You're human. You can't get rid of these things. We can manage them, we can regulate them, and we can reduce them to a degree. So if you've got good skills and knowledge, you work on your strategies, you're well prepared, you're doing your evaluation, if you're managing your emotions, if you're doing some of the 5-5 breathing daily or some mindfulness, the more of these things you do, each of them on their own might not be significant, but it's when you add them all up, as British Cycling called it, Dave Brailsford, the aggregation of marginal gains. Adding up, stacking is what we call it in performance psychology, stacking things together to get a greater effect than any one on their own. And that's what we're looking for. And that's what I've tried to do really in the program, is give you the possibilities of lots of different things that you could do. Not that you have to do all of them, but that can widen that left-hand side, and in doing so, minimize the right-hand side. And then specifically from today, I think look at your process. Do the fearless personal inventory. Look at habits to build on. Think about habits to develop. What are some things that you could start doing that would make you a better trader? What are some things that you could do more of? What are some things that maybe you could do less of? What are some things that you could stop doing? And importantly, what are the things that you're doing well already that you can continue to do? Go through that, identify the steps, break it down, start with 1 or 2 things, and then start making some changes as soon as you can. And I think, overall, just really keep a real solid focus on your trading process. That's the core of everything. Imagine a wheel with a hub and the rim. The process is the hub. Staying close to your trading process is really important. It will flex and adapt over time for sure. But any given time, being aware of that process focus in the middle, recognizing that certain events or changes in our psychology can bring us away from that hub out towards the rim. And so we need to have the awareness to recognize when that's happening. We need to build up some resiliency so we're sucked out of the hub even less than we might do otherwise. And we need to learn to bring ourselves back in, to recognize we're out of our best, we're out of kilter as such, and to be able to refocus. But at the core of everything is having a good trading process and then staying focused on it. Of everything is having a good trading process and then staying focused on it. Okay, and that brings session 8 to a close. So again, I'll hand over to you guys now as usual for some Q&A around what we've covered in session 8. And if you've got any questions from topics we've covered earlier in the program, obviously I'll also take those as well today. So I'll give you a few minutes just to have a think and do any typing, then I'll pick up whatever questions come through. Okay, just a little comment here from Daniel. The session reminds me of something I read from Eckhart Tolle in The Power of Now. Not a question, but is similar and helpful in shaping how to use the mind. No problem. Yeah, I mean, a lot of at the core, I guess, of all these things, there's a lot of commonalities. Some of it's ancient wisdom repackaged in neuroscience because we understand more about the brain. Some things are long-standing principles. Some of it we've intuitively known. Now we know the science behind it. So, and I think actually a part of the learning process is it's useful sometimes to be reminded. Certainly, for myself, I read a lot. I do a lot of courses and training. You forget as much as you remember, and it's nice to get those reminders. So I'm glad I've been able to prompt that reminder for yourself there, Daniel. I can't see many more questions coming through apart from that one there from Daniel. So I'm just going to give you a moment longer, and then if not, we'll wrap up. Okay, I can't see any typing. Okay, so look, what we'll do, we're going to wrap up there. I want to do a couple of things. I want to thank you all for attending today's session, and hopefully it's giving you some things to think about in terms of going away and enhancing your own trading performance. Remember, working on limitations and weaknesses, but also powering up by working on your strengths and successes. And I'd also obviously like to thank you for joining me throughout the entire program. And again, I hope you found it's been interesting and enjoyable. By no means is it comprehensive. There's many topics we haven't covered, and obviously we can't go into in-depth into your individual psychology, but I think hopefully it's giving you some of the key themes, some ideas and techniques to work on to increase your chances of success and to help you to make better trading decisions. So thanks again for joining me. All the sessions have been recorded. They are going to be archived, so you can access them again. I think it's really important to revisit them and revisit again and again over time. Keep building up slowly, making small changes, incremental over time, not trying to change too many things at one go. But definitely, keep the focus on the technical skills. You need that. Keep working on your strategies, your skills, your knowledge, and alongside that, keep working on developing your psychology. So many thanks again for joining me. It's been a real pleasure having the chance to work with you. Thanks to Jarrett and to Nick and the guys for allowing me the chance to do that and making it available. And all the best and good luck with your future trading. Thanks very much.